Susan Anderson, my 28-year-old son Kyle, died by suicide on December 2nd, 2003. The most intense emotions that I experienced in the earliest stages of my grief, there were about three. One was the deepest sadness I have ever felt in my entire life. From the absolute core of my being. Never felt that kind of sadness before and never have again. The next emotion was guilt, because I didn't know that my son was feeling so distraught and in such a dark place, and I felt like I should have known since I was his mother. And the third, which continues to recur, although it's getting better, is why? Why in the world would he do this when he's surrounded by, he was engaged to be married, he was surrounded by a fiance that loved him dearly, his siblings, his mom, his dad, his friends. I just, couldn't understand why. The way I coped very early on with my grief is I cried. I cried, and I cried some more. And that was just my way of getting out all of the deep sadness, all of the deep feelings that I had. I really kind of drove my husband crazy with my crying. I have a wonderful group of friends. They didn't ask me what I needed. They just came. They sat next to me. They held my hand. They brought a bottle of wine one night and we told stories and drank wine. One friend came during the very early time and she answered the phone for us. I didn't have to answer the phone. I didn't have to talk to anybody. She answered the phone and took messages. And as I collected myself, I was able to return those phone calls of those dear friends that really cared. My son died right before the holidays, the Christmas holidays, on December the 2nd. There was no way I was putting up any Christmas decorations. They brought a tree. They brought a very small tree, decorated it with lights, and we put it out on our back porch. And that was our Christmas tree that year. My friends just knew what to do. When we went to the funeral home to plan the service, we left our daughter at home alone. I'm not quite sure how that happened. She didn't want to go with us, but a friend called during the time that we were gone, and my daughter said that we were gone, and she came to the house and sat with my daughter. They just knew what to do. I am so blessed to have friends like that. One of the first times that I started feeling hope again, I was with my psychologist. My psychologist spent an entire year with me every week. And we started out, of course, telling my story, doing my grieving, trying to figure out all the feelings I was feeling about this horrible, tragic death. And once we got through all of that, he talked to me a little bit about Kyle's brother and sister and my husband, and I realized that I had there was so much love in my family, and that I could finally stop focusing on just me, and I could start focusing on my son and my daughter and my husband. And that was such a source of hope for me, just to know that yeah, I think I can do this, I think. But with his help, we did it together, and it even brought our family closer together. Often you hear about families that are separated because of when we're in the midst of any kind of tragedy. They lose the connection, the relationship with each other. And this absolutely strengthened our relationship. If anything, that's one good thing that came out of this tragic situation, was that it strengthened our family, which I am so grateful for and feel so blessed for. The things that have been the most healing for me over the course of the years, it's been 11 years, December the 2nd. The first thing that was the most healing was seeing a psychologist, just being able to talk about my feelings without any fear of judgment, and some actual professional support. My friends were great support, and my family was a great support, but the professional support was really helpful. And then once I figured out that there really was hope, and that maybe I could do something for somebody else to help them make it through this horrible grief journey. The first thing I did was I read an article in the Columbus Dispatch about the suicide hotline. And I just had this nudge. I kept going back to the article. I cut the article out, kept going back and reading it and wondering, could I do this? Could I actually do this? And so I went in and had an interview, and yes, I thought I could do it. So I went through some training, and I became a hotline volunteer. And that has been a really healing experience for me, knowing that I could maybe save a life via the telephone. The next thing we did was try to find a church. We had lost contact with our church family for a variety of reasons after our children left home. And we found a wonderful church, a wonderful pastor. We got very involved in the church, and I went on to become a Stephen minister. And it really doesn't have anything to do with suicide, but a Stephen minister is a person that walks alongside somebody that is struggling. It could be the loss of a job. It could be a suicide. It could be the death of a grandmother. Anything that they're struggling with, I am blessed to be able to walk alongside them and help them through that journey. Then another thing that I've done is become involved as a co-facilitator for a Survivors of Suicide group. And that group supports survivors of suicide as they go through their journey. And what's really nice about a support group such as that, we have survivors that are newly grieving. We have survivors such as myself that have been away from the intense grief for about 11 years. So those new survivors can see an 11-year survivor finding joy in life again and realizing that there is some hope out there. And then on the flip side of that coin, those survivors that are further away, such as myself, can go back and say, oh yes, I remember where I was 11 years ago, and look how far I've come. And that is just, that's wonderful. That's a wonderful part about that survivor support group. The first time I went to a Survivors of Suicide meeting, I went with my husband. It was really difficult for us to even decide to go. It was very difficult for us to get out of the car once we reached the parking lot. And And when we got in there, it was disastrous. My husband did not want to be there. I had coerced him into going. And I felt that I needed some support from survivors that had been through it. My psychologist had suggested that I do that. But I was very uncomfortable in that meeting. I don't know if it was because I was very newly grieving or what it was, but I was extremely uncomfortable in that meeting. I went back to a second meeting, Survivors of Suicide meeting, with a friend. A couple of weeks later, I thought maybe my husband, that maybe that was one of the reasons why I couldn't, why the meeting was such a disaster. And I went with her, and it was still a disaster. So I came home and I stayed away from Survivors of Suicide meetings. And then I was approached about helping a friend start a brand new Survivors of Suicide meeting. And I thought, well, I could try that. And so we did, and that meeting has been a blessing. Because of my experience the first 2 times I went to a survivors group, I was very apprehensive about being a support person in a new Survivors of Suicide group. But it has also turned out to be a blessing. Survivors, I have come to realize that every Survivors of Suicide group is not right for every person, and the timing is not the same for every person. We all grieve in different ways at different times. No 2 people grieve alike, and so I feel it's really important to find a survivors group that fits your needs at the right time. And if you go to a group and it doesn't feel right, try it again. It might be right at a later time, or try a different group. This group has been wonderful because it seems to be the right time for me, and it's the right mix of people for me, and I feel very blessed to be a part of it, and it just feels right, and it has instilled a sense of hope in me that there is life out there. There is life out there beyond a loved one's suicide, and there's even some joy out there. And when I look at the newly grieving attendees at a Survivors of Suicide group, I remember just the raw emotions that I was feeling, and I think, wow, I have come such a long way, and I feel so good about that. And my hope and prayer is that other people surviving, just trying 1 minute at a time, 1 hour at a time, 1 day at a time, will find some hope, whether it's through a counselor, through a Survivors of Suicide group, through a church, through your friends, that life is really worth living. Don't let other people influence you into thinking that your grief process is the wrong process. Your grief process is just what you need. We each do it differently. Find people to support you, whether it's your friends, your church, a Survivors of Suicide group, and just know that there is hope out there. There is a joyful life out there. Life will be different. There's a hole in your heart that will be there forever. Life will be different, but it can be joyful again, and it is worth living.